When a city sells you its past, it rarely calls it selling. It calls it heritage. It calls it revitalisation. It calls it a visitor experience. And sometimes it's genuinely beautiful. A building restored, a neighborhood repaired, a story finally told in public. So this isn't a sneer piece. This is an investigation. Because there's a shift that changes everything. The moment nostalgia becomes an economy. Here's the case. A city wants tourists. A city wants investment. A city wants a brand that can travel further than a skyline photo. So it turns to the past not as a messy archive, but as an asset. And the mechanism is surprisingly clean. Memory becomes a symbol. The symbol becomes an experience. The experience becomes marketing. Marketing becomes revenue. That's not cynical by definition. It's just how a lot of heritage works once it's plugged into tourism. So let's do the Steelman first, the good argument. Cities need jobs and income. Visitors want meaning, not just hotels. And shared symbols can make complex histories navigable. They give you an entry point. They can fund preservation. They can keep places from collapsing into vacancy and neglect. But the moment the past has to perform as a product, new pressures appear. In the pitch deck version, the past is packaged as a guarantee. Come here and you will feel something. Come here and you will touch authenticity. Come here and you will be connected to a story bigger than your own life. That promise is powerful. It's also expensive, because to sell nostalgia, you have to simplify. You have to curate. You have to choose a mood. You can see this in the way cities talk about heritage projects. Not just as remembrance, but as branding the city, as engines of development, as something that will bring in enormous revenue. The past becomes a competitive advantage. The museum becomes an attraction. The symbol becomes a logo. And then there's the portable symbol, the thing that can fit on a sign, a leaflet, a souvenir, a website, a tour route. One emblem, repeated everywhere, until a complicated history becomes a single recognizable object you can buy, photograph, and carry home. This is how nostalgia gets manufactured. Not invented out of nothing, but designed. The lighting is warmer. The streets are cleaned. The story is smoothed. The traditional craft is staged at the right hour for footfall. The tour guide has a script. There are places you are guided towards and places you never see. And here's the turn. What changes is not only what gets shown, but what becomes harder to say. Because tourism doesn't just reward truth. It rewards legibility. It rewards the version of the past that can be consumed quickly, understood without friction, and remembered as a clean image. That's where the danger sits. The instrumentalization of history for visitors. Complexity is costly. Ambivalence is costly. The parts of the past that don't fit the brand conflict. Shame, poverty, complicity, ongoing injustice, those parts have to be managed. Maybe they're softened. Maybe they're relocated to a small side room. Maybe they're turned into context. Maybe they disappear. And if the visitor becomes the center of gravity, then the audience becomes the boss. The local story is pressured to become a performance. The local identity is pressured to become a product. So the question becomes, whose past is sellable? Which memories become heritage, honored, funded, protected? Which memories become inconvenient, too complex, too political, too painful, too unprofitable? This is where nostalgia stops being only a feeling and becomes governance. It decides what a place is allowed to be, what it is allowed to remember, and what it is allowed to show the world. So here's the tool you can steal. Call it the nostalgia audit. Use it on any heritage project, museum, commemorative route, old town redevelopment, historic festival, or themed experience. 1. What's the commodity? Is it a symbol, a route, a museum, a costume, a story, a neighborhood vibe? 2. What's the promise? Belonging? Reconciliation? Authenticity? A return? A simpler time? 3. What's the cost? What's omitted, softened, made picturesque, or turned into background decoration? 4. Who benefits materially? City government, developers, museum institutions, tour operators, property owners, visitors, locals who actually gets the upside. 5. What becomes newly unsayable? What parts of the history are treated as bad for the brand? Let's run it quickly. If a city sells old town charm, what happens to the modern residents whose lives don't match the charm? If a museum sells a nostalgic era as a theme, what happens to those who remember that era as hardship? If the symbol becomes the whole story, what happens to the parts that refuse to fit the symbol? This isn't an argument against heritage. It's an argument for reading it properly. Because once nostalgia becomes an economy, it shapes the past for the needs of the present. Jobs, revenue, image, status, competitiveness. And it trains visitors quietly to feel a certain way on cue. So here's the question I want to end on. Where have you seen the past turned into a brand, and did it feel like remembrance or like a product you were meant to buy? Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, subscribe for more interesting content from Truth Through Texts.